Just because we get a new title should not change who we are. It just should change what areas we focus on or what are we looking at. But if we're a leader going into that title, then we should already have work ethic. We should know what it takes to make it happen. And when you're in the pocket leading that team, that's when I believe that a true leader shows up. And those are the managers that I look for.
Hey, what's going on, all you Keep the Changers? Thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm on with my good friend, Drew Tutton, who is a businessman extraordinaire. Drew and I have known each other for a little over 2 years. I've had the opportunity to do work in his store, and he's also a 3-time guest on Keep the Change. When I think about leadership, I think about Drew, and I'm really grateful, Drew, that you've come back to join us again and talk about leadership in the dealership. Before we start, tell us a little bit about your history, tell us a little bit about your businesses, and then let's get into it and talk leadership.
You got it. Well, I'm Drew Tutton. I'm the owner of Tutton Group, which consists of RV, tractor, as well as our automotive industry. And we have a few other businesses that we've got into over the years as well. Very blessed. God has blessed us tremendously. Ironically, I'm also partner with the Boyles Automotive Group and oversee 6 of their stores. That'd be 7, including the store that we partner on. But, for me, the industry over the last couple of years has been challenging. I think even for any of us. One is coming off COVID, a time that many businesses grew and had a lot of success that we never seen coming. And then all of a sudden the business felt like it flipped on a dime to go back to some kind of norm. And the facts are I wasn't ready, and I don't think any of my people were ready for that. And what I mean by that is we were quick to get onto our team for having the COVID hangover, not working as hard. They were making a lot of money for not a lot of effort, and that changed. Well, when I looked in the mirror and really started dissecting our companies, I found that if I look back on myself, I've done much of the same. I enjoyed the ride. I definitely spent more time with my family and vacations and doing things. And so, if you will, as the leader flows, the company flows. And so over the last several months, I've had to really look at myself and adjust myself and make sure that my work ethic was back in line with what I wanted it to be for the success of our businesses. And that is starting to allow me to do a better job with holding my managers and the leaders within the store accountable as well. And I just try to run with that, do as I do, meaning I want to walk the walk. I don't want to be a guy that says just do it and not have any meat behind it, if you will.
Now, Drew, you and I were talking about last week that you still work 6 days a week. You work about 12 hours a day on most days. You're all in. Plus, you have all your other businesses, and you have businesses outside of automotive as well. Where do you find your passion for this? Obviously, because of what happened with COVID to where we are now, it was the high versus kind of the low and the struggles of the wave going in the boat. But where's that passion come from? And the reason I ask that, not that I don't know, not that it's not pretty obvious to people who do know you, but I want somebody who's listening to this as a manager who someday wants to get in the seat that you're in. Maybe not 7 seats, but your seat. And I want you to speak it, if you would, sir, from that viewpoint. How do you keep that fire burning?
For me, it's the win of the game. I have said my whole career, if I ever get up in the mornings and I'm not motivated to get in and get after it, that it's time for me to do something different. I believe it's the way I grew up, Bart. You know a lot about that. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth by no means. But listen, I have some friends that are just as driven as I am that did. But for me personally, my life and the roads God took me down has made me who I am. I'm confident in that. But I still today don't want a business that we can't win. And really, for the last 6 or 9 months take really the last 6 months of 24, without a shadow of a doubt, I own 3 Chrysler stores. It was the toughest time I've seen in a long time with Chrysler, and there was no wins in there. And so therefore, the business started really weighing on me and the team, and it became a job. It became a hard job. We felt like we had nothing to celebrate. And therefore, that negativity starts drifting in. If you look at my RV business, oddly enough, just the year before, we had the same opportunities. So for having multiple businesses for me has given me a little bit of insight of how I can switch gears real quick and get people's thoughts changing and what I have to do that. So in 23, we wrote down a lot of our inventory. I made the decision as an owner. We took $1 million write down in our inventory to right size it, to get our team to where they could have success and see what that looks like. But then we held them accountable for moving the inventory, held them accountable for PVR on the front end of the deal as well as the back end of the deal. And I did very much of the same thing at the end of last year in the automotive business to try to get people's mind in the right headspace. But then we can talk about work ethic. To me, if I take some roadblocks out of the way that they see as an uncontrollable, then once I take them out of the way, then I can hold them accountable for their time at the job, their focus on the job, what areas we're going to focus on, how well are we doing paying attention to the day-to-day business with leads, with how we follow up with those leads, with phone calls, listening to the phone calls. How's the team responding to those phone calls?
So you and I talked at NADA, and I asked you if there was one thing you wanted out of a manager that was starting anew more than anything else. There's one little bit of advice you would give to him. What would that be? I'm going to let you share that, and then let's deep dive into that a little bit.
Well, I believe I used the statement with you as I like a manager that's in the pocket. You know, a manager that stays in the business. Just because we get a new title should not change who we are. It just should change what areas we focus on or what are we looking at. We're normally adding a few more tasks if we get, quote, a title. But if we're a leader going into that title, then we should already have work ethic. We should know what it takes to make it happen. And when you're in the pocket leading that team, that's when I believe that a true leader shows up. And those are the managers that I look for.
So when you look at the mistakes that leaders have made in the industry as a whole, not necessarily the Tutton group of stores, where do you feel that most managers get crimped, where they hit a ceiling, where they end up getting out of the business, or they just aren't successful? What are some of the mistakes that you think managers make that have caused them in our industry to go south?
I believe they lose the fun in the business. I think they stop working car deals. They stop appraising cars. They stop training. Training's a big deal to me. In my belief, my managers should be the one training our salespeople, our finance team, and sales managers together should be thinking that through. What does that look like and how do we train and what do we do per store? And the other thing is, I think that for me and what I try to train our managers, and again, I think that's where you've done a great job for us in helping get this nailed home, is that it's work and it's family. For me, God's first in my life, my family and my work are real close to second. And I don't say that because I disregard my family. I just don't believe I can provide for my family in the ways that I have if I don't have a really good work ethic and I'm not really good at what I do. And I believe that sometimes, many times, that people take a higher management job, they let that kind of go to their head, and then they start losing focus on what got them there, which is normally in the pocket, hard work, knowing their industry. And hopefully they have balance at home and a family and a wife that's supporting the hours that they're putting in and the work they're putting forward.
So good. So when you talk about your training, your people who train, tell me a little bit. You mentioned being in the pocket. You mentioned going over deals. You mentioned going through phone calls. Tell me a little bit about how you see a day of a superstar manager within your business.
Certainly. And first, though, I don't want to go to mention for people to think that we don't use outside trainer. We don't have the other seminars that we go to, because we absolutely promote that, push on that, as you well know. But I'm looking for a manager that's the tone first thing in the morning, that they have a group meeting. They're going over some maybe closes, trial closes, phone calls that we heard the day before, successes as well as areas that maybe we didn't win. And then that starts off with a 30-minute meeting, right? And it's one or two things that we won and one or two things that we could get better with as a team. And then throughout the day, right, I expect around anywhere between 11 and 1 o'clock, I'm expecting we're gathering our thoughts again. Here's the leads that come in. Here's what we have stumbled on. Here's the cars that's landed, if you had cars come in or what have you. But that information that's going back and forth between the managers and the salespeople And from my experience, there's always a training opportunity in there. I think of this morning, we had trucks dropped off at the dealership, and I just come from a meeting of talking through the horsepower of the new trucks, right? Listen, these trucks have been out for a few months, but we still have sales staff that really does not know that it was this in 24 and now it's 50 more horsepower in 25. We don't beat them up over it. Let's train them. Let's talk to them. Let's get the mojo going. Let's get the excitement going on.
Yeah.
So that's what I look for. And I expect that to happen as you're working deals throughout the day. But the real key to me is we start the morning with a meeting, and we start the morning with a couple areas we can get better and a couple areas that we really win with.
So good. One thing that you and I have done as we went through developing the Leader Within You 2.0, which of course is John Maxwell's elite book that to me, it was built for automotive, right? Because some of those chapters, the first chapter was, the first thing we did was did a disc assessment. I'm going to do a little Bart plug here. All right. And then that was good. I like disc. It's good. It's a good way to read people. You and I have had so many discussions. I'm always looking, how can we be better? What's a better way to do this, right? And I love disc, but I think I found a better way to help develop our people. So here's what it is. You and I did this. I gave you an emotional intelligence assessment.
Yep.
And the reason, and again, I get it. If you're in the car business, you're listening to this and said, disc, that's been around forever. Yes. As a matter of fact, so is Jesus. Yes. Doesn't mean the Bible is the good story that has a lot of facts that tells us how to live our life, right?
Amen.
So there's nothing wrong with old school information. On the other hand, emotional intelligence has only been around like 20 years. But here's what's so fascinating about emotional intelligence, which I'm starting and installing the boot camps, Drew. And what it does is it tells me the capacity of that manager to make money. Yes, yahoo. So what that really means is those individuals that have the highest emotional intelligence make the most money on the planet. You have very high emotional intelligence.
I believe that.
Yes, I did a test. I could prove it.
No, I believe that those people make a ton of money because but it's making sure if everybody understands what emotional intelligence is. And I do believe it's also, you and I had this conversation, right? A lot of it is a God-given talent, but it is a talent that can be improved on and worked on, and how the words we speak, how we react to different things, and so on and so forth. 'Cause I don't think I was a high emotional intelligent person several years ago. I believe that was things that I learned over the years by reacting wrong and then being like, man, how could have I done better in that scenario?
Yeah. And the reason I think I'm bringing this up is, again, every time I've talked to you or talked to any other of my clients, which I don't have clients, I have friends. I'm just make it clear. My friends who also hang out with me and we do business together, I get that there's always, I'm looking for that secret sauce, man. You know, we're looking for that pill that helps us lose 20 pounds. I believe, maybe you're not, but I am. I believe there's a pill that, whoop, and I think if we don't discount it, it's right there. And what do I mean by that? Well, you said it, but there's 4 pieces to emotional intelligence. And again, as you're listening to this, don't let that part of your brain that says, oh, I know that stuff, don't let it disconnect, because this is a magic pill. Because if I hire Joanne, and I know Joanne's high in emotional intelligence, you know what I know? She's going to make a lot of money for me, right? And she's going to be effective, and she's going to be a goal setter, and she's going to be all those things you needed of a manager. Start the day, get training, do what you say, follow your lead, and then act on it so it's her lead. That's what high emotional intelligence does. The first piece is social awareness. And see, I want my people, and I know you do too, to understand what's going on around them. The first piece of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. So I want my people to know their stuff, man. I want them to know when they get angry. I want to know when they're mean to their wife. I want to know when they're mean to Johnny when he's desking a deal. I want them to know that. But the second part is self-management. And if we've got a group of managers that can't manage themselves, how in the heck are they going to manage people, right?
Amen.
At home or in the workplace. So what they have is they have self-awareness, and then they manage that. They know they've got an issue. They're going to take care of it. They know they need to be better at doing training. They're going to study it. They're taking those things that they know they have to be better at. They've admitted it. They make a decision, and they work on those things. That's what increases income for everybody. Third part, social awareness. They can read a room. They can tell if there's a bad vibe. They can tell if they're not communicating very well with somebody. And lastly is relationship management, where they have deep relationships. So that's kind of where we started, Drew. That's where we're starting now. And I remember the conversation. I'm going to drop this in a minute, and then I want you to take over. But I remember the conversation. We were talking about some struggles in your store, and I thought, that's it. Not only do I want them to really understand their own emotional intelligence, but I also want them to know how to really coach.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's the piece, Drew. It's hard because there's people that go through my boot camp and they're really good at coaching. And there's other people that go through the boot camp and they need to keep going. Yeah, they don't even know what coaching is. And I might add to this, so I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, but I know you know what I'm talking about, and I know you believe this to be true. Coaching develops people. If we can develop people, we got happier customers, happier employees, and more money, period. So when you talk training, when you talk coaching, what do you mean by coaching? What do we mean in your organization? Because your guys, a lot of your people have done a good job of getting that happen.
You know, coaching for me is learning one another. It's relationship development. That is what coaching is. And really a good leader, I believe, is coaching all the time. I believe most everything they're doing, because as you and I have shared, when I'm coaching, I'm also learning. I'm not just the preacher. I'm not at a pulpit preaching everybody about this is how we need to do it and this is how it goes. When I'm coaching, it's more of one-on-one with, hey, that didn't work and why not? What's going on there? What could have we done to do better? Because my vocabulary is not the best to start with, but it's not always the best choice of words either. And not that my words are bad. It's just there's a better way to say it. And there's times that you'll get the greenest salesperson that if you get into that trust where they trust you and you can trust them, they open up to you, therefore you're coaching them better, then they will open up and have their own ideas as to how they're going to translate that sales pitch that some people will call. I call it demonstrating the product or helping them through the process. But to me, that's where the rubber meets the road in most of these coaching opportunities. Yeah. So that's where you and I try to encourage our people. Listen, we're not asking you to be the expert in this. We're not telling you you got to know it all. We're telling you, you got to be able to form these relationships. You got to be willing to be vulnerable yourself as to how you would do it and hope that people come back with a better idea. And that's the coaching, learning, teaching all in one. And that's when we see the most success. That's when we see stores take off. That's when you see a young salesperson go from selling 5 cars to, 20 cars. That's when you see a service manager that comes in where he looks like he got his head beat in every day to one with a smile on their face and excited to get after the next day.
Yeah, so well said. I'm thinking about a green person that I met at Foundation Chevrolet in Colorado. And this guy was an engineer. And we've talked about DISC on this show before. And he was more of an introvert, just needed all the details. And yet he couldn't get an engineer job, as happened so many times. So he decided to try selling cars. Well, he didn't really know what he was doing. And fortunately, I got to spend some time with him. And one of the things that I did with him, Drew, was we did, and you've seen it, a wagon wheel, where I said, first of all, let's start with how many days are you going to work in the month? And he said, I'm going to work 20. Okay, good. And I knew he'd appreciate numbers because he's a numbers guy. I said, how many people can you talk to belly a day? Nose to nose. How many? And based on your traffic, don't exaggerate it. What do you think? Well, I think I can really talk to 3 people, either from service or a couple that walk in or make appointments. I can talk to 3. Okay, well, that math is 60 people in a month. Okay, let's look at that. So if you talk to 60 people in a month, NADA says, there's a lot of numbers here, but NADA says we're going to land 80% of them on a car, right, Drew? So that's 48 people that this young man was going to land on a car. 70% of those people, 42, he was going to take for a demo. 60% of those people, 36, he was going to bring inside. 50% of those people, 30, he was going to put on paper and write out. 30% of those people he was going to close because there's a mix of past customers, there's a mix of phone ups, there's a mix of e-leads, and there's a mix of ups. That means that young man on paper found a formula, a magic pill. I knew how to talk to him, which was the first thing. I couldn't go really fast with him, not because he wasn't bright, because he was more deliberate in his thinking. I had to mirror the way he communicated to himself, right? And the result of that, Drew, and I'm really, pride isn't one of the things I use very often, but I was really grateful for him, for his success. Within a month and a half, he was at 22 cars a month because he had a formula, right? And I'm reminded last week, Jack Schneider was on our show, and Jack, Drew, owns a high-line independent store called Certified Benz and Beamer. And he does about $250 a month. They're very consistent. He's got a couple different, all Highline, by the way. So we know he does really well. When times are good, they're really good. And 2 locations. One is just BMW and Mercedes. The other is Highline. That's everything else. Right down the street from each other. And there's one thing that he has the salespeople do every day, Drew. And he's got a spreadsheet. Everybody knows. So Drew's on in the morning. Bart comes on in the afternoon. We got 5 salespeople. There's a spreadsheet, and it's the one-on-one checklist. So every manager, when they come in, knows who their checklist is with. They know who their one-on-one is going to be with. And they spend 15 minutes doing strategic one-on-ones with their people.
Very good.
Yeah. And to land something, people want to hear from you, not from me, but this is just really good. I have a friend of mine up in Indiana who now starts having his people come to the sales office 10, 12, 2, and 4. You said it again with the people, right? Yep. He got that idea from a Southern Texas store that was just killing it. And, Van Tile's been really good at that. Berkshire Hathaway does that very well. So you had mentioned, come on in. Where are you at right now? What's going on? So not only is he doing that, but he's also having his guys do one-on-ones. And it's moving. It's slow, though.
Yeah.
It's slow sometimes. And I was talking to this guy last week. There's a trainer by the name of Paul Cummings. You ever hear that name? He was from Georgia.
I have not.
And he would say this every day, every time, without fail, no exceptions. So when we're going to do something, we got to be deliberate, consistent, committed every day, every time, without fail, no exceptions. It's true. So many times people start and they don't finish.
That's right.
How do we get them to stay with it every day, every time, without fail, no exceptions? How do we get them to put those processes in place and put them in concrete so they continue to do them and nothing can make them waver? What's your thoughts?
Well, I believe some people are driven to do that and some just aren't.
Mm-hmm.
The better we get to be at coaches and leaders, the faster we're going to be able to identify that.
Yeah.
And you and I think are similar to this, even though I think you give people a little bit longer than what I might at times. We've had that conversation. But you can't quit on them too quick. And I don't think I ever quit on anybody. They quit on themselves. But I'm big on really pushing them hard to try to get them to where we need them to be. But then if they're not going to get there, a lot of times they'll leave me. I don't have to leave them. But if we're not careful, we will change who we are and we'll become weaker for them, trying to keep them on the team. And nobody wins in that. They don't win. They get flustered with themselves. We get flustered over times. We're not hitting the goals and the points we were trying to make. So that's where, again, I think as we get better at coaching, we get better at being leaders, we'll change the people we need to change pretty quick. I think through some of the best coaches, as you know, I'm a football guy, but you can take football guys, golf guys, basketball, baseball, it doesn't matter. But I think through with Nick Saban, and I'm not a guy that reads up on a lot of people, and I have not read up a ton on Nick, okay? But what I do recall of Nick, not every team that he took on had a ton of talent out of the gate. There were times he was a 600, 700 team that was not, he wasn't undefeated all the time. And my point to that is he had to have patience with those guys. But as his coaching career continued to grow, he got those teams turned around a whole lot faster. And I believe it's because he got better at coaching to recognize talent, recognize who he could coach, and get rid of those that he couldn't. Because he was also a coach that could take a 3-star recruit and turn them into being, a Heisman Trophy candidate. I think through that national championship game when he pulled Jalen Hurts at halftime and put in Tula, and I was in that stadium thinking, that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. He either has a ton of kahunas or he's about to just look like crap, right? Then they turn around, they win it. They beat Georgia with Tula coming back from behind. And then Tula transfers, becomes an excellent player for Oklahoma, goes on the NFL, and then Hurts went to Oklahoma and has had a great NFL career so far. And then you look at Tua, right? That's still been successful. But man, Nick had both of those guys on his team, high performance players that could take Nick's change at a halftime without having bad press.
Yeah, so good.
And so I'm not even talking about the talent, on these two guys as much as I am the coaching job and the trust those players must have had in him for them not to be ready to knock each other out after the game.
Yeah.
Because one of them got pulled and the other one could have been out there beating his chest.
Yeah. And they wanted to. I mean, Jalen came back with a great attitude. He really did. Obviously, he's a special human.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And you can't teach character. And obviously, both those guys are character guys. But I want to talk a little bit about that because you don't give up on people when you're done. And I get it. But you don't give up on people. And yet you also don't communicate with everybody the same way. So when you've got that person, and we can think of victories, and we can think of the people we just want to shake because they just didn't get it. And we know if they had just said, what does Drew want? How would Drew do it? And they did the same thing, frankly, they would have had success, but they fought it. But some did, though. Some people listened. When you think, let's think, because it's the difficult conversations, I think, where people come on a podcast.
Yep.
They want to hear, how does this guy who's had good success? Yes, he's had challenges, but he figured them out. Yes, he's had some people he's had to replace, but he's figured it out. How do you communicate with that difficult person that has talent and you get that you're just make your first or second swing, you just didn't get anywhere? How do you deal with that difficult one?
Bart, I believe I'm very transparent. The first couple conversations I have with anybody is a coaching, soft sell, trying to bring them into my environment, if you will. But if they don't get it after that, then we just have a real tough conversation. Mm-hmm. And I call it the way I see it. If I see someone being arrogant, and that's based on my opinion, I'm going to call them out on their arrogance. Mm-hmm. If I see them being a do as I say, not do as I do, I'm going to call them out on that. And why would you not, lead by example? And as you know, a lot of people is going to have pushback on that because I don't believe people get up in the morning and say, how can I screw this day up? So I expect when we go into these conversations, tough conversations, that they are going to push back and be like, I'm not arrogant, or, I don't tell people what to do and not lead by example. Then I have to be prepared to give them examples that I have seen of where that would go and where that would lead to. And then once we start showing them how we're seeing it, and I encourage them, I'm not the end all be all, right? But if you have really good people around you, just ask them. I think of my first real management job. It's not my first management job. My first real management job, though, was becoming a used car manager at Chrysler store in Marietta. I was the youngest guy on the staff, but I had a lot of success selling cars. I'd already been in the pay here business before and come back to normal retail. But I got put in as the used car manager. And here I am managing people that are anywhere from 5 to 15 years older than me and telling them how they're going to make phone calls, they're going to straighten the lot, and they're going to, you know, that could have went really bad. But all I did with each of them was talk to them just the same way I wanted to be talked to, explain to them my mission and where I felt like we had to get. I tried to recognize their strengths the way I seen them and ask them to point out my weaknesses as I displayed them. And what I meant by that is because I was a hothead, right? So I was the guy that would want to go toe to toe with anybody at any time. But those older guys took that first conversation when I told them, I want you to be truthful with me and tell me when I'm not being the guy that I should be, when I'm not being the right leader for us to succeed. But the only thing I ask, let's don't do it in public. I'm not going to do that to you in public. But I learned so much from that team that helped me throughout my career that's unbelievable. And still friends with some of those guys. A lot of them's passed away now, but still really good friends with several of them. And I tell them, right, they carved my leadership. They carved my management style.
Yeah, there's so many nuggets there. And the one thing I hear is I study Gallup all the time about how to lead, the Gallup Strengths Finders. And I really look at what Gallup says of how to be a good coach. And the first thing they said was what you said. Here's my expectations. Make it really super clear. And also, what you do really well, what are your expectations? Because I might need to define your expectations for you a little bit if they're too low, because I see you big. I see you winning. And I know that you say that because I've heard you. I see the big picture in you. I wouldn't have hired you. In fact, you don't make mistakes in hiring. It might not be the right person. The person didn't take accountability for their own talent and they didn't make it. But when you hired them, you knew that they had opportunities to win, right?
For sure.
Another piece that you said that Gallup talks about is continually coach. Hey, how we doing? What's going on? You mentioned that a few minutes ago where you said checking in all the time with the team. It's always happening. Talk to me. What are you doing right today? Talk to me. How you doing on those phone calls? Where do you need help? I mean, always just being in there with them. And the third part was defining accountability. This is what victory looks like. And this is what I'm going to hold you to. And what Valerie Burton, who is our coach at Maxwell, says is the first thing when you coach somebody, you've got to listen to them. Pay attention to them. How do they communicate with themselves? What is their emotional intelligence when we just step back and watch? We have to listen and pay attention. The second thing she says, Drew, is ask questions. Just ask them. When you and I ask, it's opening it up, that dialogue. But the third thing that happens, because we're listening first and asking great questions, we're not just directing them at first. The third thing that happens is we build this incredible trust.
Yep.
So they trust us. So then the fourth thing that can happen is because we built that trust, we have direct communication. And what you just said is, hey, I know what you want. Hey, you know what I want. Hey, you're swinging and missing, and it's not necessary. We need to talk about this. Let me tell you what I think you can do. And if they trust you, they're going to be willing in most cases, right?
Amen.
So I want to talk about a leader that's been a great coach for you. And I want you to talk about him in terms of how he embraced going through a 12-week boot camp, how he's embraced bringing other people in when nobody asked him to do it. He just took people on his own and started coaching them on his own. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And what makes him such a great leader. And we're going to close at that. And as you're listening to this out there in listening land, ask yourself, what can I learn from that? Or what can my people learn from what this young man has done? And he is young too, but he has taken it. He's followed you. He respects you. He listened to you. He was guided by you. And he has been a really good coach for you. So tell us about this guy, if you would.
Yeah, so Jacob come on with me as a young technician, and he wanted to become a diesel technician with us, and he did. Real successful diesel technician very quickly, always eager to learn. I was telling a technician just a couple weeks ago because they said, where'd that guy, how did he get where he's at? He's sub 30, and he's a fixed ops operator over 5 different locations. But I remember leaving the store at 8 or 9 o'clock very often and walking through the bay, and Jacob was still in there finishing cars, working on cars or what have you. So phenomenal work ethic. And then over time, as our business kept growing, he was just a special nugget for us. You could see it based on his attitude, based on his work ethic. Not any comebacks that I recall. I'm sure there was some, but none that stood out to me. But what he had a lot of, for lack of better terms with our audience, he had a lot of P&V, right? My dad, called that piss and vinegar. And me and Jacob went toe to toe many times, meaning with, I wanted this. He didn't think that could happen. And he'd be very passionate with his feedback. And quite honestly, I respected that. And so once I built the diesel shop, he became a shop foreman. Then he later managed that shop. Then I put him as a manager right at the beginning of COVID over our biggest service department we had in the group. And he was a little intimidated. He wasn't sure. He felt like maybe I was making a bad mistake. And what I told him that day, I said, Jacob, you stay in the pocket, you listen to what's going on, and I promise you we're going to work it out. And I'm going to be here for you every step of the way. He had never been a service writer. So all he had done was turn ranches, manage a shop. But Jacob got in the pocket. He learned. He stood next to a service advisor, learned how to write service, listen to what the noise was, and he started addressing the noise one by one. Not with the customer. He addressed the noise with what processes do we have internally that we're breaking down that would make these guys' life better, which is his advisors. He knew as a technician that if he got their lives better, that he could put more accountability on them in order to make the shop better and more productive. And that was the angle that Jacob took. So when I give him the opportunity to go through your training, he was one of the few guys, as you know, that he drank the whole bucket of Kool-Aid, right? I mean, he didn't just take a cup. He went all in. And after the second or third session, he was like, well, man, why can I not form my own team? Why can't I get that and get three or four of my guys to meet with me? And I start coaching them through this. And he's continued to multiply and continue to grow on that. Yeah. So I thank you a lot for that, because he's made us a better company, continues to grow, continues to make the departments more profitable. And to see him he's a man, as you well know, he is an absolute man, but he is a young man in our industry that has found out how to balance life, how to balance work with our desire to win.
Yeah. You've mentioned God a number of times, and your faith guides you and is your most important piece. You mentioned that in the beginning. And that's the thing I admire about you more than anything else. I know Jacob comes from that place first. If he didn't have that place when he walked in the door, he did because of your tutelage and believing in him. I can't tell you how many times you've done this, Drew, and I've seen it, and it's so impressive. You've put people in place that might not think they're there yet, but you believe in them. And you convince them they're there yet. And they walk in the path of being there because what you believed. You didn't come from a place where you had your dad tell you, hey, you're going to make it to the stars and the moon. But you did have people that lifted you up, that told you were really good at what you did. And that those persons guided you. Jacob has done that with others. He's believed in people. He's lifting them up because he saw something in them that they didn't see in themselves. And I want to congratulate you for that. Fortunately, we've got people that are evidence of that, of what happens when they devote themselves to learning how to be a better leader. It works at home and in the workplace. And your group is evidence of it. And I just want to thank you for trusting me to be able to do that. So, Drew, how do they get a hold of you? If somebody wants to talk to you about how to be a better leader, how you've done it with your stores, how would somebody get a hold of you, Drew?
Absolutely. My email address is dtutton, that's DTUTON @tuttongroup.com. My cell number is 678-758-2176. I'll be happy to help any way I possibly can, and with any scenario that I can. So.
Drew, always, I'm very selfish in our time together. I love doing it. I can't thank you enough. Thank you to everyone at Keep the Change who listens, because they so respect your opinions and your direction. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you all for listening, and keep the change.
Take care, everybody.